Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. No matter what time of the day it is, I want to welcome you to Not Another Male podcast, hosted by your boy, Johan Devato. This is going to be our first episode, so we're going to try to get this handled the best way that we can. This is my first time doing this, so I want to make sure that when we do this in a way that is helpful, constructive, and that this is something that's very beneficial, not just to men, not just to women, but just as a more wholesome helping hand throughout all of our lives and how we navigate things. We'll be talking about a lot of different topics, about a lot of different characteristics that happen within gender-based identity, that happen within sexuality, that happen within social means. So we're going to be going over and covering a lot of things. So this is the first episode, right? And the first episode is titled Masculinity Can Be Healthy and Safe. So the reason why I decided to make this the first concept for a first episode is because I feel like when we talk about a lot of not just male podcasts, but a lot of male-led platforms that tend to happen where it's instructing about the gender dynamics of how things work, or it's talking about the social ideas that are always present, it tends to be the same echo chamber of the same ideas, right? The same concepts of marriage traditions, the same concepts of what a boyfriend and a girlfriend should look like, who needs to run the household, who makes money here, who needs to talk, who needs to be subservient, who needs to be dominant, why cheating looks different here when men do it, why does cheating look different there when women do it. And I just feel like we hear those dynamics so much, so often, that it's for our best interest if we honestly hear something different, something that is not being consistently replicated, especially out of a man's mouth. And I definitely want to look into my position of privilege in being a man and understanding my speaking platform and trying to give grace to something that is different, something that is wholesome, something that is healthy. Because I believe that masculinity itself can be healthy and it can be safe, but things will have to change. So I'm just going to go over some of the talking topics that we'll be going through as the episodes continue. And there will be more additions as time goes on. There will be guests that will come on. They will more than likely be friends of mine, depending on how big the podcast gets. But we will be talking about so many different things that it will not just be my own input that will be heard. We will need a lot more things to be stated, a lot more things to be replicated, a lot more things to be shared among different people. So let's just get this out the way, right? So the first thing we're talking about, masculinity can be healthy and safe. We just can't talk about it without describing it, right? So what is masculinity, right? So masculinity, to keep it as simple as we can, is the social expectations of how a man is supposed to act. When we talk about the social expectations of how a man is supposed to act, we're not saying that just men can replicate these actions, but rather that is the expectation that when you are showing these particular behaviors, you are saying these particular things, you are doing these particular things, you are doing them to replicate what are supposed to be things that men do. Now, we've definitely hit a point in our lives, and especially in history, where we understand that there isn't really a what only men can do or what only women can do. We're not talking about physiological things, but we're talking more about social-based things. So when we're talking about what masculinity is, often we're talking about it in retrospect to what we believe are the ideas put in place for what men do and associated with things that for decades upon decades, centuries upon centuries, that we attach of men to do. Values, behaviors, thoughts, everything. So when you're looking at masculinity, we are talking about the societal expectations of what men can do. We're looking at it from a gender performance standpoint. We are looking at the actions that people perform and which gender we attach them to. And this is obviously talking about it in a binary. Obviously, there is a whole spectrum to gender performance, but when we're talking about masculinity, its original roots in its conversation are in a binary. What men do is what men don't, what women don't do, and what women do is what men don't do, right? The second question is, what is patriarchy? So patriarchy is any culture that is led by men. So the ideas of the culture and what is replicated are ideas that come from male-led society. So men have the power in those societies, and they get to determine what men should do, what women should do, what the expectations are, what the laws are, who they benefit, who they do not benefit. That is what patriarchy is. And that is not a bad word, a toxic word, a difficult word. It is very much just an understanding to how particular cultures get where they get. If you hear a train in the background, I'm also sorry. I live next to the metro, so you're going to hear that from time to time. But that is what patriarchy is. It's not a bad thing. Can patriarchy be harmful? Yes. Can it be beneficial? Yes, like definitely. But it really just depends on how it's handled. But we have to understand we're talking about patriarchy. We're talking about a culture or society that is led by men. We're talking about another topic that we're going to be going over too is tradition. So a lot of traditional standpoints, what men should do, what women should do. And we've just understand that at this point, a lot of that has like changed. A lot has changed. We do not, like, we're no longer in this point where we are just like men are the sole breadwinners, women are not the breadwinners. Like, economics have changed. Economics have changed. Living situations have changed. So that kind of concept, men just asking women on dates is not just the only thing now. I feel like there are just like so many examples. My brain gets stuck. But like, like holding the door open or walking on the sidewalk, who walks on which side, or who's supposed to lead and who's supposed to follow. Like, those are traditional concepts, but a lot of those have changed. And I think we need to be able to change with the times, because with the change that we have gone through, I think it has definitely produced more wholesome and more loving relationships that gives autonomy to both partners. And which, speaking of that, that's moving into the next one, which is hetero relationship dynamics. Now, I'm a heterosexual man, so I cannot speak to LGBTQ-based or queer relationships, and I don't want to really step in that. I'd rather have my friends who are members of the community speak a lot more to the gender performances in those dynamics. But I definitely will have my 2 cents in it, but it is not my space to hold. But we will be talking about hetero relationship dynamics especially, so that goes back to the dating expectations, how those have changed, what things have stayed and that seem to work for a lot of people, and what things have clearly just provided no benefit and need to change and are more of just an arguing topic than it is something that is constructive and beneficial. The next thing that we'll also be talking about on this podcast is misogyny. I do feel like misogyny is a very, very big part of patriarchal cultures, and it is very much rampant within Western culture, especially here in America. And I do think that it is very important that as men, we reflect on our position about how we view ourselves and also how we view women and how we talk to them, how we think about them, and the language that we use towards them. Because like I said, if you want to have a healthier dynamic, not just with yourself as a man, but even with your dynamic with women, you have to learn to listen to others. And you have to realize that sometimes while this language might be comfortable with us because we've grown up with it and we've heard it in music and media, that does not mean that it is not harmful. And that does not mean that it cannot change. Learn to be flexible, learn to be adaptable. It's helpful. So misogyny is a big thing. Misogyny comes from the concept of the hatred of women, the mistreatment of women. So if we're going to sit there and we're going to reframe masculinity to be healthy and helpful, we have to understand that sometimes our language itself is harmful, is threatening, and can be toxic, and our actions and our behaviors and our ideas, we just need to unlearn them, and that's okay. It'll take time, but we're going to work through that, right? Men's mental health, big advocate for men's mental health. I definitely do think that men deserve a ton of support. From what I've seen, I need to actually re-review the data because it's been some years, but men usually have the highest suicide rates, and that's because growing up, men are taught to compartmentalize or internalize a lot of the struggles, trauma, and things that they go through, so they do not seek help for it, whether it be professional or even sometimes within their own brotherhood or within their families, because they believe that they're supposed to tackle and handle so many things on their own. And I don't think that men need to honestly go through that. I don't think that we need to consistently suffer in silence. And I think that we need to very much break down those walls that we've been taught to hold up and try practicing being more vulnerable. It is okay to cry. It is okay to receive affection. It is okay to receive love, because those are the things that we deserve, without question. And I honestly can't see how that would even give me any pushback, but someone's going to push back. Another thing is talking about emotional intelligence and language. That is a big thing. I definitely do feel like as growing up, men are not taught how to have emotional intelligence, which is the ability to empathize, recognize the feelings of others, and then react and respond appropriately, so that you are more of a supportive tool than you are a hindrance, because there is this idea very much that men only operate by logic and objectivity, and we very much do not. Men are very emotional. The way that we just express emotions is just taught in a different way. So So men very much have the capability to have emotional intelligence and to use emotional language so that they can show that they are endearing and caring and loving. We will have a whole episode on that as well. The flexibility in masculinity is a big, big, big thing too. It is that masculinity does not need to look one way. It does not need to be rigid. There does not need to be your hyper masculine men and then that is it. Like there needs to be flexibility where it is okay for men to express their masculinity in a diversity of ways. Like despite the fact that when you see my appearance and you hear my voice and you even see the things that I do, a lot of times you're going to take me to be more masculine than anything else in my performance. But when you see some of the ways that I dress, when you see some of my gestures, when you hear some of the things I say, you would consider them to be feminine. And while I have no issue with that whatsoever, I definitely do know that there are other men that do tend to contest me on that idea that because I am doing things that are not considered the 100% traditional masculine output or expression or performance, that there is some question to either my sexuality or who I am as a person. And we need to give masculinity that flexibility. You know, men should be able to do a lot of different actions without their whole process of their identity of being a man coming into question. I think that's very important. So at this point, those are going to be some of just the main talking points, just so we get an example of what's happening going forward. There will be more episodes that will come out. I'm trying to make sure that I do it every Saturday. So this is going to be my first pre-recorded one so I can throw it up. When I find out how this shit works through Spotify, because I have no idea, but I'm going to figure it out. But I definitely do want it to be clear that it is okay to be a man. It is okay to be masculine, but you have to rework it to be something that is healthy and beneficial and loving to those around you. We do not have to be hard. We do not have to be rigid. We do not have to be cold. We do not have to be closed off. We do not have to fight the world on our own. There are so many things that we do not have to do. We can accept love. We can accept hugs. We can accept affection. And we can most definitely accept the positions and the narratives of the women around us. It's important. We need to hear something different. We need different conversations. We need different dialogues brought to the table that are more than just men fighting women and women fighting men, and homophobia and transphobia and what's a real man and what's not a real man and what's a real woman and what's not a real woman, and high value men and high value women and low value men and low. Like it's too many elements and it's too much fighting. And I know that people say all the time that we need to come together as a community, but I feel like we're only going to come together as a community when we begin to work on listening and hearing each other out. And that includes sharing different perspectives and different ideas. So as long as you are here on this podcast, understand that this is not going to be your traditional male podcast. We are not going to have those same kind of talking topics where it's just going to be let's shame one or let's shame the other, let's point fingers here, let's point fingers there. We are having these conversations to be constructive, to build, and create something more healthy. So that is my first one. This is my introduction. I hope you all have fun here. I hope you especially stay for the kinky conversations, because honestly, the sex-based ones are my favorite ones to have. So I thank you all. Please take care. Have a wonderful day. And if y'all ever want to make me any beats so I can have a dope introduction, I would appreciate that. All right, bye-bye.